constants in PHP, and we did define constants as variables that are defined and cannot be redefined, or their values cannot be modified again. And we saw the syntax and we did some basic examples, right? In this tutorial, we are going to take a little dive into what data types are in PHP. We noticed that variables that we've been defining so far, we did not know their types, but generally in programming, variables have their types, right? Data types, they refer to the type of data that a variable can store. There should be a container that can store, just for example, your milk. There should be another container that can store your rice. There should be another container that can store the other things. That is what data types are all about. A data type specifies the type of data that a variable can store, such as an integer, a float, a character, and so on. That is what data types are in PHP. In PHP, there are various data types, and you have some of them here. You have the string, you have the integer, you have the float, you have the boolean, the array, the object, the resource, and the null data types. All of these data types have the way they are defined in PHP. The string data types is used to store a text, right? For example, your name, your school, your location, all of that can be stored within a string. And a string is defined with the single or double quote. We actually get to see that. You also have an integer data type which is used to store whole number values, right? Now you should note that, like I said, I specified whole number values. 1.5 is not an integer. 1 is an integer. In case you want to actually understand this, we'll actually get a dive into that, and I'll be explaining them one after the other, though we might leave out some until we reach the level where we'll actually discuss that. So I'm going to switch to my text editor, and I'm going to actually create another folder so that we organize our work. Data types, and inside data types I'm going to create a file, data types PHP, and I'm going to actually start with the integer data types, right? Integer, we said an integer data type is a type that is used to store whole number values. It could be negative or positive, but you should note they are whole number values. So if I take that my x, for example, is equal to 7, right? This is an integer, right? This is a whole number, and my y, for example, y is equal to negative 8 is another integer. If you want to know the type of the data type that you have, you could use the var keyword to actually print out the value of a variable and its type. So I'm going to print out x and I'm going to print out y. Now let's open our browser and check out what we will have, so that I actually get to see what I mean. So I'll go to data types, and data types, I'll talk about data types of PHP. That is it. So you see we have int 7 and int 8 because we have defined an integer here, and like I said, the var keyword is used to print out the value of a variable and its type. That is it about integers. If I try assigning a point 0.5 here, this is no longer an integer. You should take note of that. And because I just said that, I'm going to dive into the float, right? Floating points are decimal points, like fractions, right? So if I say maybe I'll not call it x again, I'll call it another name, maybe float one, float one, and set it to 7.5, and float two, set it to minus 8.5. I try printing them out, var float one and var float two. Just so that we organize our work, I'm going to use a break here. Echo a break. And I'm going to try to format my stuff a little bit. Like I said before that PHP is embeddable with HTML, so I'm actually going to echo out some HTML here. Let's say integers values. And then I'm going to take the line. I'm going to copy this and paste here. Multi-float. Right. So if we actually open our browser, let me close this out. Actually get to open our browser, you actually sorry, something is wrong somewhere. So we not close our tag. So if you actually see here, you see that we have our integer printed out and our floating point values printed out. Oh, floating points again. What are floating points? They are decimal values or fractions. They're different from integer values. We made mention of the fact that integer values are whole numbers. Floating points are fractions or decimal, right? The other data type that we'll talk about is a string, something we've been using. I'm going to say strings, and I'm going to say I'm going to define another string equal to hello world, right? So we've actually seen this before. We assign hello world to the string variable, and you see strings could be in single quote or in double quote. It means that I can actually put string 2, and instead of putting it in single quote, I'm going to use instead of putting it in double quote, I'm going to use single quote. All of these are going to be printed out. I can actually use var dom, and you actually see what I mean. String 1, and if we try printing that out here, you see that we have string, and it even passes the length of the string and the value of it, right? So we have so far talked about three data types in PHP. There are really many, and I hope you've actually understood this. Boolean, on the other hand, is used to store true or false values, right? It could be either true or false. So you just define a boolean and either set it to true or you set it to false. It's a simple variable. We do that by uh, you can define a boolean. You don't actually have to specify that it's a boolean at the beginning. So you just have to say the variable name, and once you set it to true or false, it automatically detects that that is a boolean. So if I use var dom, sorry, I use var dump and I try refreshing my browser, you're actually going to see that we have our boolean true here, right? Those are the basic data types in PHP. We'll go to arrays and objects in the later course, but for now you should just know that variables store different data types, and some of these data types, you have float, you have integer, you have strings, you have booleans, and so on. We will get to the string data type in detail in maybe a later course, because the string actually has a lot of other things that you can do to it. That is it about data types in PHP, and I think we'll just do another dive into operators in PHP, how you can actually manipulate these various variables and their types, how you can maybe add them, subtract them, and so on. Hopefully, you got a clear understanding of what data types are in PHP, and I hope to see you maybe in the next.